All right, welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. And Temple of the Silver Star is, we have both academic and initiatory tracks. And in both of those, we offer structured training in, the Thelemic magic and mysticism. And at the end of the presentation, I'll give some contact information for anybody who's interested in learning more about the Temple of the Silver Star. Let's just get right into it. Tonight's presentation is just a standalone presentation, not part of a larger series. Though in some ways, I would like this to be a little bit of sort of a prologue to a class that will be starting up, a longer series that I'll be starting up in January on astrological magic and hexagram rituals. Though there, we'll talk about the sun, of course, but we'll be talking about the sun as just, one of 7 planets. But the sun in Thelema and in other traditions as well, of course, has a special significance and a special importance. So I thought it would be worthwhile, doing a whole class just devoted, just to the principles of the sun. And then, in January, we can talk about the planets as a whole. And there we'll talk about the sun as just one out of the 7 classical planets. So this class will be a little nonlinear, perhaps. There's a lot of different things to talk about and relating more traditional magical and astrological ideas and a number of different esoteric traditions to the Thelemic approach as well. So we're going to jump around a little bit, but hopefully there'll be some coherent structure will come out. So just to get us started off, I want to just start with the story that gives the name to this class. So in 1934, Crowley was part of he was had a libel case where he sued someone for libel for accusing him of black magic, and during the course of which he ended up losing. But in the course of that case, there was a time when the prosecutor, or the defense lawyer, was questioning Crowley about how he had taken on this name, the Beast 666, for himself. So I'm just going to read this is from Richard Kaczynski's book, Perturabo, the biography of Crowley, relating this story, which I assume some of you already know, but I think it's a nice way to get us into the topic, and it's also an amusing story if you don't already know it. So the lawyer questioning him, Malcolm Hilbery, questions him about this identification, and Hilbery says, "Did you take to yourself the designation of the Beast 666?" Crowley says, "Yes." Hilbery says, "Did you call yourself the Master Therion?" Crowley says, "Yes." Hilbery says, "What does Therion mean?" Crowley says, "Great Wild Beast." Hilbery says, "Do these titles convey a fair impression of your practice and outlook on life?" Crowley says, "It depends on what they mean." Then Hilbery says, "The Great Wild Beast and Beast 666 are out of the Apocalypse?" And Crowley says, "It only means sunlight. 666 is the number of the sun. You can call me Little Sunshine." So obviously Crowley's being a bit funny here. But at the same time, there is something actually going on in this, the Beast 666, which of course looks sensational and a bit frightening, especially to Christians. But Crowley's saying, it only means the sun, and then humorously says, "You can call me Little Sunshine." So this would be a nice jumping off point for our exploration of what the sun, in the principle of the sun, means in Thelema, and why Crowley himself identified himself with this principle, both as a person and in his special role as the prophet and founder of Thelema. All right, so as Hilbery said there, the Beast 666, of course, is from the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, which is the last book in the New Testament, which I'm sure most of you are at least broadly familiar with. And so in this visionary work here, in chapter 13, it begins, and this is apparently John of Patmos having visions that are being revealed to him. "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. So this is an image that we'll see several times throughout our discussion here today. And then you can see Albrecht Dürer, a great German Renaissance artist, his depiction of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns. Also take note there in the description of the beast, there's the reference to a lion, and we'll see that again as well. And then finally, at the end of that chapter, we read, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. So this has been understood in a lot of different ways at different times, and the meaning of the number 666 has been interpreted in many different ways. Historically speaking, it's likely that this was a reference to the Roman Emperor, Nero, probably. And it's a kind of encipherment of his name, but later on it goes on to have a whole other life of itself. Interestingly, there's also some variations of the manuscript where the number of the beast is 616 rather than 666. Though of course it's 666 that is the important number in the tradition and for us as well. Okay, so Crowley himself, this number and the great beast is very important to him throughout his entire life. Some of you, I'm sure, know this story, or parts of it anyways. That Crowley in his childhood, his mother was a Puritan, part of the Plymouth Brethren, and quite devout. And Crowley, who was a difficult child, she often identified him, not entirely seriously, but as the beast, from Revelation. And Crowley eventually comes to identify with this and to understand it. First he's being rebellious, but does eventually come to understand, especially through his revelations and his magical work, that this image is, although demonized, by Christians, is actually something holy and sacred and powerful. So in 1904, just before he receives the Book of the Law, he already has this personal sense of identification, with the beast and with the number 666. It's already important to him. And then, again, I'm not going to go through all the details of this story. I assume a lot of you already know it. But in the few weeks leading up to the reception of the Book of the Law, it's Crowley's wife at the time. They were newly married, Rose, who she is the one that first gets contact, with this. With Horus and with the new Aeon. And so she's telling Crowley, that Horus wants to speak to her. Crowley questions her, asks about, different impressions and tests the correspondences. He says, what number is this god associated with, what color, and so on and so on. And she does well. She answers the questions, though Crowley's still suspicious. And so they go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where they had been on their honeymoon, and where they had done some magical work, including some work inside of one of inside of the Great Pyramid, which is an interesting thing there. And so they go to the museum, and he says, show me which god it is that is trying to get in touch with me. And so they're walking around, and Crowley's following along behind her and kind of giggling to himself as she passes by, image after image of Horus, until eventually she comes to the stele of revealing here and says, that's it. That's the god that's trying to get in touch with you. And so Crowley is first struck by the depiction of Ra-Hoor-Khuit, who's not the standard version of Horus, but a Horus as synthesized with Ra, the god of the sun. So he's struck by that, and then he looks at the back of the stele, and that's on the right. That's the back of the stele, and notices that affixed to the top of the stele is it's like a catalog number used by the museum, and it is catalog number 666. So again, he already is primed. For that number. He already has a personal relationship to it, and now this becomes extremely meaningful and impactful on him. He begins to take this all much more seriously, and then a few weeks later he receives the Book of the Law. So again, we have the connection of that name to Crowley, to the stele revealing, to the inception of Thelema and the transmission of the Book of the Law. Now, as we say, Crowley identifies the number 666 there as a number of the sun. And so we can explore a little bit the Gematria and symbolism of this number. So on the top left there, you have the Kamea, or magic square of the sun. The magic squares are grids of numbers arranged so that every row, column, and diagonal, the two true diagonals that go from corner to corner, all sum to the same number. So the magic square of the sun is a 6x6 grid, and of course 6 is one of the sacred numbers of the sun. The sphere of the sun on the tree of life, Tefereth, is number 6. And so 6 is a sacred number of the sun. So it's a 6x6 grid with the numbers 1 through 36 arranged in it. Now, 36, of course, is the square of 6 because it's a 6x6 grid, right? And what every row, column, and diagonal adds up to is 111. And since there are 6 rows and 6 columns, the entire sum, which is the sum of 1 to 36, is 666. So these 4 numbers, 6, 36, 111, and 666, are all solar numbers. So this is where we get the basic identification of 666 as a solar number. Now, in his working out of the Gematria and symbolism of the Book of the Law, Crowley created this, it's found right at the end of Book 4, right at the end of the 4th part, where he talks about the reception of the Book of the Law. He has this handwritten table, which he calls the first sketch of a Kabbalistic key to Liber L. And so this is a small excerpt from that key dealing with the number 666. So we see first, well, let's look at the second line there. So to Megatherion, that's Greek, it's Koine Greek, means the great beast. Now, as far as I understand, this phrase doesn't actually appear in the New Testament, though it is, good, well-formed Koine Greek, and it does talk about the beast, though I believe that it does not actually use the phrase the great beast. But it's good grammar and good isopsephy, and it sums to 666. Then Crowley also renders Therion, which just means beast or wild beast. He renders that, transliterates it into Hebrew, and that's on the top line there you see as Tav, Resh, Yod, Vav, Nun. And this, by Hebrew Gematria, sums to 666. Now we also have the name Qabalah, who is the father of Parsifal. In at least some versions of the Grail myth, I believe that's in anyways, in some versions of the Grail mythology, Qabalah is the father of Qabalah is the father of Parsifal, and Parsifal was the magical name chosen by Charles Stansfeld Jones, who, at least for a while, Crowley considered to be his magical son or his magical child. So Crowley, as the father of Parsifal, is Qabalah, and that sums to 666 when transliterated into Hebrew. Crowley also writes 666, the number of the stelae, which we just saw, the catalog number of the stelae, the number of the beast, right, from Revelation, the number of the man, which, again, we saw in that last quote there from Revelation, that it is the number of a man. And he says the apocalypse there, right, referring to the Revelation. Now, he's also got, this one I find a little bit questionable. He spells the Hebrew word, Chef, Yod, He, Aleph. He adds another Aleph to the beginning. Or, let's see, he respells, it's Chef, Yod, Vav, sorry, which is the normal Hebrew word meaning beast. But Crowley Kabbalistically spells it a little bit differently as Aleph, Chaf, Yod, He, Aleph, and then enumerates those letters in full to also attain 666. So that one's a little less convincing to me, but you can make up your own mind. Then he's got that enumeration of each letter in full below that. And then below that, we see 0 equals A in the Book of Thoth, the tarot. And so this is talking about, Atu 0, the fool, who corresponds to Aleph in the tarot. And of course, the equation of the significance of 0 is very central in the Book of the Law and in kind of Thelemic philosophy, right? And then below that, we see that it says A equals 111. This is because Aleph, spelled in full, which is Aleph, Lamed, Pei, sums to 111, which, as we saw, is one of the sacred numbers of the sun. And then next to that, you can see he's got the glyph of the sun there, equals 6. So the idea that 111 times 6 is 666. So even the number 666 can be broken down into 6 times 111. And of course, that comes right out of the mathematics of the magic square, because each row and column sums to 111, and there's 6 of them. All right. Then we also have Ankh of Nakhonsu, the figure on the stele. It was Ankh of Nakhonsu's funeral stele, right? Which Crowley is also enumerated as 666. And a few other things as well there. Let's see, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We also, the last thing I'll mention here is that quote you see at the bottom from the Book of the Law. That stele they should call the Abomination of Desolation. Abomination of Desolation, interestingly, that's a biblical reference to the first in the Book of Daniel, and then Jesus references it a few times in the New Testament as well. So that stele they shall call the Abomination of Desolation. Count well its name, and it shall be to you as 718. So this is a Kabbalistic kind of puzzle that Crowley struggled with for, I think, a couple of decades, until eventually he finally hit on the answer, which is just that it's stele 666. The Greek stele in Greek sums to 52, and so stele 666 sums to 718. It took him for a while because he couldn't figure out what the name of the stele was supposed to be. And then one day it dawned on him that the only name it ever had was that name in the catalog, stele 666. All right, so let's keep moving on here. So Crowley also, in addition to the story about his mother and growing up and the revelations he had, also personally identified with the sun. Here's Aleister Crowley's birth chart, his nativity. I'm using whole sign houses here, which some of you may not be as familiar with. And I've just sort of simplified here things just to the 7 classical planets. And so you can see, so you can see my cursor there. This here is the ascendant, right? That's the eastern horizon. And so the sign on the ascendant, or his rising sign, is the sign of Leo, which is the house of the sun. So the sun would be said to be the ascendant lord, or the lord of the ascendant for Crowley's chart. Now, I've sometimes heard people nowadays who do like modern astrology saying, oh, this is a little bit of a cheat that Crowley identifies so strongly with the sign of Libra and with the sun, or sorry, so strongly with Leo and the sun, when really he's a Libra. But this is coming from modern astrology, where the sun sign, is the most important thing. And if you could reduce a chart to a single factor in modern astrology, it would be the sun sign. Whereas in traditional astrology, which is what Crowley followed, Crowley's main sources are Ptolemy and William Lilly for astrology. Really, the ascendant would be the single most important thing, and then the sun and moon are second to that. So there's even this astrological identification with Leo and with the sun. All right, so from there, we can talk a little bit about the meaning of the sun in astrology, and we'll do a lot more of this in that series that I mentioned starting in January. All right, so this is a quote from Vettius Valens, who was a 2nd century Egyptian astrologer, one of the earliest sources that we have for traditional astrology, and one of the best. So I'll just read here from a quote from his anthology. Valens says, "The all-seeing sun, consisting of a fiery and intelligent light, the instrument of perception of the soul, in a nativity," meaning a birth chart, in a nativity signifies kingship, authority, mind, and then I added there nous, which often is translated mind, but has other meanings as well that you may be familiar with. Intelligence, form, motion, height of fortune, dealings with the gods. Dealings with the gods here probably refers to oracles. Excuse me. The sun is often given special rulership over oracles and prophecy. Other gods besides, in the Greek tradition, other gods besides Apollo, have oracles, but Apollo's oracle at Delphi is the most important one. That's probably where this identification of the sun and oracles and prophecy come from. So dealings with the gods, judgment, being engaged in public affairs, action, leadership of crowds, father, master, friendship, notable figures, being honored by portraits, statues, and crowns of office, high priests of the fatherland, and then there's a lacuna in the text, a little bit of a missing there. It's probably something like governors of places or leaders of places. Of the parts of the body, the sun rules the head. And it's interesting, we'll see the head again in our discussion today. Of the sense organs, the right eye. Now this is from the, pre-Hellenistic Egyptian tradition, where the sun was the right eye of Horus, and then the moon is his, or sometimes of Horus, sometimes of Ra as well, and then the moon the left eye. Of the torso, like within the torso, it rules the heart, the life breath or sensory movement, and the nerves. Of substances, it rules gold, and we'll talk more about gold. Of crops, it rules wheat and barley. He is of the diurnal sect. There's a concept in traditional astrology of dividing the planets up into a diurnal and a nocturnal sect, or a day sect and a night sect. And so the sun is like the light of the day sect, and the moon is the light of the night sect. So he is of the diurnal sect. It's pretty obvious where the sun would be of the day sect, right? He is of the diurnal sect, the color lemon yellow, and bitter in taste. And at the bottom there, I have just a selection of some of the different glyphs that have been used for the sun throughout the tradition. There's a lot of others as well. The one on the right, of course, is the one that we've been using for at least the last 500 years or so. But there's others in the tradition as well, and there's 2 examples there. All right, and now a quote from the Renaissance, one of the great Renaissance figures, Marsilio Ficino, who was a philosopher, an astrologer, a magician, and a musician, amongst other things. And so he has a fairly short book called De Sole. This is from, I didn't write this, from chapter 9 of that book. And so I'll just read a couple of quotations here from that. So Ficino says, "Our divine Plato named the sun the visible sun of goodness itself. He also thought that the sun was the manifest symbol of God, placed by God himself in this worldly temple, so that everyone everywhere could admire it above all else. Plato and Plotinus said that the ancients venerated this sun as God. The ancient Gentile theologians, Gentile, he just means not Christians or Jews. The ancient Gentile theologians, like what we say pagans, right? Gentile theologians placed all their gods in the sun, to which Iamblichus, Julian, and Macrobius testify. Certainly, whoever does not view the sun in the world as the image and minister of God has certainly never reflected upon the night, nor looked upon the rising sun, nor has he thought how extraordinary this is, nor how suddenly those things which were thought to be dead return to life." And if you read in the context of the work, you can tell that this last thing here about things that are dead suddenly returning to life. He's talking about like in the springtime, plants that seem to have been dead throughout the winter, seemingly miraculously return to life under the increased rays of the sun. All right, and then a little later in that chapter, he says, "But when Plato says that the sun prevails over the whole visible realm, doubtless he alludes to an incorporeal sun above the corporeal one, that is, the divine intellect." And now, he talks about how you can subtract away the material qualities from the sun to arrive at a principle of pure immaterial light, and then says, this pure light exceeds the intelligence, just as in itself sunlight surpasses the acuity of the eyes. So the thing I mostly wanted you to get here is this idea that not only is the sun itself given so much importance, but the sun becomes a symbol of an even higher principle, or in almost the symbol or manifestation of an even higher creative principle. Let's see, I guess it's not in this quote here, but in other parts of Ficino and in other traditional sources, the sun is often described as an eye, and a great eye that sees all. Traditionally, especially in the Renaissance, their theory of optics, they believe that rays were emitted by the eyes, and that it's the rays coming out of your eye, and then striking and returning to your objects and returning to your eye that conveys sight. Whereas we think of the eyes as purely passive receptors, for photons or rays of light. But the idea that the eyes actually emit rays was a traditional view, and so the sun is a great all-seeing eye. And you can see that in the Greek tradition. We talked about in the Egyptian tradition, the sun being identified, with the eyes of Ra or Horus. So that's a good thing to be aware of there. All right, and then this, the image here you see is from a 17th century text it covers a lot of astrological and also magical thing. A lot of it's about calendars. There was a very esoteric text. It's called the Perpetual Card, which in modern English would mean something like, or we would render it as something like infinite calendar, and it's about how we can calculate, the future placements of all the planets, but it also gets into a lot of deep philosophical and esoteric interpretations of these. And also draws a lot on Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's work, which we'll see again in just a minute. So in the image there, on the top, we see an image of the sun, and we read Unus Sol Rex Stellarum et Fons Lucas. So Unus Sol is like the one sun, or the singular sun, king of the stars, and Fons is like literally like sort of fountain or font, but meaning source. So the king of the stars and the source of light. And I believe this author is drawing on Agrippa here, or at least from the same tradition that Agrippa was part of as well. And Agrippa says that unity, the concept of unity and the number one, is ascribed to the sun, which is the only king of the stars. And then below the sun there, we see an image of a phoenix, and phoenixes will come back a little later in our discussion today. And we see there Unus Phoenix in Mundo Elementaris. Again, one phoenix, or the singular phoenix in the elemental world. And Agrippa says about the phoenix, also amongst birds, these are solary, related to the sun. The phoenix being but one of that kind. The idea is that the phoenix, which is this legendary mythical bird, that when it dies, it is consumed, in flames and reduced to ash, and then born again out of the ashes. The idea is that there's only one of them. So they don't mate or reproduce. It's just this one phoenix that endlessly dies and is reduced to ash and is then born again. So we can think of that as an interesting symbol. Of course, the sun is very often linked to the element of fire, right, for obvious reasons. And then also this idea of singularity. Just as there was one sun, in the heavens, there's also one phoenix on the earth. So again, just that image of the singularity and unity associated with the sun, and the association with the phoenix. All right, so again, I said we'd be jumping around a little bit. So jumping over to Egyptian mythology for a moment. Important things to be aware of, and we're not going to get into this in a lot of detail here, but that in Egyptian tradition, the sun, as in many other traditions as well, in the Greek, the Greeks often depict Helios, the Titan of the sun, as riding in a chariot that he rides over the sky, and there's lots of other traditions as well that there's some sort of vehicle that like a boat, or a chariot or something else that bears the sun across the sky each day. So that's a very prevalent archetype, and so in the Egyptian tradition, this is a bark, or a boat. And so on this boat, you see, again, this varies a lot between different cities and at different times in Egyptian history, but it's always a solar god on the boat. On the left there, you can see Ra on the boat. And on the right, the image on the right is a really interesting image with a lot of other stuff going on. That's a tomb at the bottom there, holding the bark. We see a whole group of gods there, which I think are just sort of generic gods. That's an interesting thing that happens in Egyptian imagery, right? You just have like this whole series or groups of gods, but not like specific ones. So a whole group of gods there. And then we see Khepra, the beetle, bearing the sun disk there. And so, so this symbolism here, especially with Khepra, is that the solar bark, it travels across the sky, it rises up in the east, travels across the sky, and then sets in the west. And when it descends into the west, it enters the underworld and then passes through the underworld, kind of under the earth, and then rises up again in the east. And in this journey, the sun is confronted by enemies, like Apophis, the serpent, that it has to overcome in order to rise again the next morning. And so this night journey of the sun is often, there's different gods are associated with the sun, often at the same time, not only in like different places and at different times, but there'll even be different god forms or gods related to the sun for different like purposes and in different contexts. And so Khepra is linked with the passage of the sun through the night. So Khepra is depicted as a dung beetle, and of course the dung beetle, like rolls a ball of dung. of course, it has its eggs inside, and so this rolling this ball of dung becomes, related to the passage of the sun through the underworld at night. So we'll see that again, and we'll also we'll see the Kefra and this idea of the solar bark, and also the idea of the sun's journey through the night as an important element in solar mythology, in this cycle of falling into the underworld, overcoming obstacles, and then being born again or rising again in the east at dawn every day. So the sun definitely is linked to, although the sun itself, is often seen as constant and eternal and shining, never changing. It goes through these cyclic patterns, both on a daily basis, right? That creates the day and night cycle, and then also on an annual basis of creating the seasons, summer and winter, right? Which corresponding to like day and night. So there is also this cyclic idea in addition to the eternal idea, and the unity of those two is very important, in Thelema as well, that it's both eternal and constant and cyclic. All right, so jumping back to the Renaissance here, at the top, I've got a couple quotations here from Agrippa's 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, and this is where he's talking about the planets, and here's some stuff that he says about the sun. So he says the sun is called Phoebus, meaning shining, Diaspiter, which means like Lord of Heaven, a title usually given to Jupiter, though interestingly Jupiter and the sun kind of trade some of their titles and significations in different works, because they both have some of the same symbolism of like kingship, or being like the king of heaven or king of gods or father of heaven, all that. Apollo, right? Apollo is a solar deity, linked to the sun, to harmony, mathematics, knowledge, reason, oracles. Titan. Titan here probably refers to Helios, who is this? Although Apollo is solar, Helios is the sun in a more direct sense. Pan, which is another name for Apollo. Phanes, we don't really have time to get into it now, but Phanes is a very interesting figure from the Orphic mythology. Horus, Osiris, as it is in that oracle. The sun, Osiris, Dionysus gay, Apollo, Horus, king ruling the day, who changeth times, who giveth winds and rain, the king of stars and the immortal flame. He is called also Architenens, which means like bearing a bow, right? And again, Apollo, is an archer bearing a bow. Interestingly, Apollo's twin sister, Artemis, is also depicted as an archer, and she's associated with the moon. And so we can think of the idea of this, like the firing of arrows being like the rays of light, emitted by the sun or the moon. Let's see. So burning, fiery, golden, flaming, radiating, of a fiery hair, of a golden hair, the eye of the world, again, that association of the sun with an eye and with sight. Lucifer, which literally means light bringer. Seeing all things, ruling all things, the creator of light, the king of stars, the great Lord, good, fortunate, honest, pure, prudent, intelligent, wise, shining over the whole world, governing and vivifying all bodies that have a soul, the prince of the world, keeping all the stars under himself, the light of all the stars, darkening, burning, overcoming their virtue by his approach. I'm not going to really get into it here, but this idea of the sun overcoming the virtues of the other planets by his approach refers to conditions in traditional astrology where planets that are very close to the sun sort of give up some of their power to the sun, based on the observational fact that planets that are very close to the sun cannot be seen. Basically, anything within a planet within 15 degrees of the sun is invisible. And once it separates by more than 15 degrees, then it can be seen either just before dawn or just after sunset, depending on whether it's ahead or behind the sun, and on the zodiac, on the ecliptic. So anyway, overcoming their virtue by his approach, yet by his light and splendor, giving light and splendor to all things. In the night, he is called Dionysus, but in the day, Apollo, as if driving away evil things. So this idea of the sun by day being Apollo and the sun by night being Dionysus is something that, I don't know, I find very interesting. And so elsewhere in 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, Agrippa recommends that to invoke planetary powers, one of the things that you can do is recite the Orphic hymn to the deity that corresponds to that planet. And this is used a lot. The Orphic hymns are very important for Renaissance magic. And Marsilio Ficino, actually, who we talked about a minute before, actually set them to music and then used to perform them using, not scales, what do you call it? Modes, using modes, chosen for their correspondence to the planets as a form of magic, and often with a healing or medicinal purpose. He himself had Saturn very strong in his chart. He had Saturn in the first house, and considered that to be, and suffered from what we probably now call depression, what he called melancholy, and so a lot of his magic is devoted to healing, especially to healing the condition of melancholy. All right, so here's just 2 excerpts from the Orphic hymns. So from the hymn to Apollo, or Apollon, the Greek name there. A few quotes there. This is addressing Apollo. You are the eye that sees all. You bring light to mortals. Your hair is golden. Your oracular utterance is clear. You make everything bloom with your versatile lyre. Right, Apollo is always depicted as holding the lyre, right? Which symbolizes, harmony, the harmony of the cosmos, right? You have infused harmony into the lot of all men, giving them an equal measure of winter and summer. And then from the hymn to Dionysus, we read, I call upon loud, roaring, reveling Dionysus, primeval, two-natured, thrice-born Bacchic lord, savage, ineffable, secretive, two-horned and two-shaped, ivy-covered, bull-faced, warlike, howling, pure. So again, these are just 2 excerpts from it, just to give you a little bit of a taste, but trying to introduce this idea of the sun, having these 2 different forms and even different deities associated with the sun by day, and then the hidden sun, the sun below the earth at night, which is something we'll see, that we'll see again. And something I think also very interesting to contemplate, the idea of the secret sun, the sun at midnight. And that's a very interesting kind of archetypal theme. And again, we'll see it as we go on. All right. Oh, it looks like that Saturn glyph got kind of moved over there. So that says transmuting lead into gold. The glyph got moved over when I converted this to a PDF, which is annoying. So anyways, there's also the whole world of alchemy and the importance of the sun in alchemy, and also the importance of gold in alchemy. How some alchemists took this more literally than others, but one of the great alchemical projects, and one form at least of the great work, is the transmutation of lead or other base metals into gold. Now we know now that, well, at least as far as we know now, this is impossible to do with alchemical techniques, though there are some really interesting first-hand accounts or eyewitnesses, even of very skilled metallurgists who knew how to distinguish gold from fake gold, who watched lead being transformed into gold and testified to it. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing, though. As far as we know, it's not possible, because both lead and gold are elements, right? They're not compounds, so they can't be dissolved and put back together, at least not by standard means. It is actually possible, though you need a particle accelerator to do it. I thought at least that this had actually been done, but it turns out that it's actually just been proven to be possible. The element bismuth has been synthesized into gold in a particle accelerator. It's not at all economically feasible way of producing gold, and what little gold the stable gold you actually do get out of it is radioactive. But it can be done. You just need, in a way, I was thinking, a particle accelerator is almost like the modern version of a crucible or an alchemical vessel, right? This place where transmutation can happen, and where the really like primal conditions are created, especially when they talk about like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. They talk about reproducing conditions that haven't existed in the universe since it's the very first. Well, there's been some other proposals in recent years that of other cosmologies that don't include a Big Bang. But if there was a Big Bang, the first few like seconds after that of reproducing those like primal conditions to study the nature of things, which I think is interestingly related to some of the things that the alchemists were trying to do of going back to the first matter, the matter that is able to differentiate itself into all other things. So thinking a little bit symbolically, and again, we could spend many classes talking about just this, but the idea of the transformation of lead into gold, considered as a symbolic or a spiritual process, is also starting from the first matter, our unawakened state in the world, and transmuting and purifying that nature to become like the spiritual gold. And in finding, spirit within matter, and in arranging, the self and the life to conform with that spirit is at least one way, that we can think of that process of transmutation. And that type of alchemical, sort of spiritual alchemy is very present in initiatory traditions, like the initiatory tradition that we carry on today. And so again, the gold, is always associated with the sun. It is the metal of the sun, and so there's a lot of crossover between like the symbolism of gold and solar symbolism. All right, I just wanted to mention, this is a slide that some of you have seen before if you were in the Sephiroth class that we did a couple months ago. And so on the left there, you have the geocentric model. And so you can see in the center there, you have the elements there. There's water and earth, and then the air, and then the fire, and then the spheres of the planets, right? And so in this model, you've got the moon, Mercury, Venus, then the sun, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn, then the sphere of the fixed stars, and then finally, the divine realm beyond that. And then in the heliocentric model, like following after Copernicus, Copernicus himself, although he, realized that the sun was at the center, he still kept this idea of like a sphere of fixed stars. Though others, like Giordano Bruno and Thomas Digges, and this image you see on the right is actually the title page from Thomas Digges' book, A Perfect Description of the Celestial Orbs. They realized that there was no sphere there where all the stars were fixed, but that there were, some actually talk about an infinite number of, we know that the number isn't actually quite infinite, though it is unimaginably large, number of stars, all at varying distances. And so in Digges' image there, so you can see the sun in the center, where's my cursor? There it is. The sun in the center, and then Mercury, then Venus. Now here you have the Earth with the moon orbiting around it, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. And then in this outer circle here, he's written, this orb of stars fixed infinitely up, extendeth itself in altitude spherically. And, sorry, it's a little small on my screen here. And therefore immovable, the palace of felicity garnished with perpetual shining glorious lights innumerable, far exceeding our sun, both in quantity and quality, the very court of celestial angels, devoid of grief and replenished with perfect endless joy, the habitacle for the elect. And so they also realized that not only are these stars, there are very, very many of them and fixed at varying distances, but that each star is itself a sun, and that our sun is just our local star. And people like, Giordano Bruno and others start talking about the idea that there may be other planetary, there are other planets orbiting other stars, and that they may have life on them as well. And so you start to get kind of a decentered world where not only is the world, the Earth, not the center of our system, but our system isn't even the only system, that there are actually many stars, that we're not, that we're not the center of anything. And that these ideas, the heliocentric model, and also this idea of a vast, broad cosmos filled with all sorts of life, not just, this one planet, are two ideas that very often go together. This sort of the stellar and the solar are very connected, and again, that's something we'll see again as we go on. All right, so then I want to talk a little bit briefly about the notion of solar phallic religion. Any of you who have studied Crowley, I'm sure, have encountered this idea of the sun being associated with the phallus, and also the idea that somehow this compound of the sun and the phallus represents like the primal religion, or the first or most basic religion. Now this is largely based on 19th century anthropology, both the idea that all myths and all religions are at their essence solar, as well as the idea that the phallus was so important in all religious traditions. Now it doesn't mean that, now, in modern anthropology, this has been really quite and largely overturned and disproven. Though it doesn't mean that those archetypes aren't found in many religious traditions. And I think it also, just because some of their claims may be historically inaccurate, people like Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough, modern anthropologists will tell you that Fraser's really kind of picking and choosing his examples and kind of shoehorning things in to fit his ideas. And so you'll have that kind of criticism that this idea of like solar phallic religion is more of a Victorian or Edwardian fantasy than anything that was ever really true. Though again, the idea that it is some sort of a fantasy projection, makes it significant. And I think even if we don't believe it to be literally true, we can still see importance of it, and the importance of that idea and that myth, for that time. It's if it's not great anthropology, it could still be the creation of a mythical, of a myth, right? So again, this is a huge topic that we don't really have time to go into, but I give another quote from Ficino here, who, of course, this is earlier than the 19th century, but again, there's already this association, of the sun, with the phallic power. And so Ficino says, heaven, the bride, by heaven, he's kind of talking about the sun here, right? Or he is talking about the sun. Heaven, the bridegroom of earth, does not touch her, as is commonly thought, nor does he embrace her. He regards, illuminates, which again is related to sight. He regards her by the mere rays of his stars, which are, as it were, his eyes. And in regarding her, he fructifies her, and so begets life. So you can see that there's this idea of the sun like fertilizing the earth, and that is true essentially, right? I mean, the earth is largely a self-contained system, but the sun is a constant source of energy, for the earth, and that life, on earth couldn't exist without that sun. So there is something that is sort of physically true here. All right, so in reading Crowley, and again, I think this is a complex kind of issue that we don't really have time to go into in all the details. And I think it's really worth sort of thinking and meditating on. And the way that Crowley talks about it at different times, I think is different, or in different contexts. At times, Crowley really does seem to associate the phallus and the phallic power, with men specifically, and the male genitals specifically. Though at other times, it seems to take on a broader meaning of like a sexual or generative power. And that's how we in modern Thelema, well, I can't speak for all modern Thelemites, but in Temple of the Silver Star, this is certainly true, to understand it more in this broader sense. And so I have a quote here from Sora Merrill, Phyllis Sackler, who was the founder of Temple of the Silver Star, and this is a quote from one of her books here, and she says, "The phallus has been called the sole vice-regent of the sun upon the earth," and that's the full quotation there that she's quoting from. We'll see in a few slides. So it's been called the sole vice-regent of the sun upon the earth by Therion, Crowley. But it is the sexual forces in general that is meant by the word phallus. Those forces which, when activated in the correct way, arouse Kundalini fire up the spine to end in union with Nuit in ecstasy. So you can see that she's, right, she's making it very clear that this power, the generative power, is not, the male organs, even if historically speaking, the male sexual organs are the main symbol of this. That's not what they are, for us, and that we recognize that, all men and women and non-binary individuals, at least fully mature adults, all possess this sexual generative power. And and that, you know, this power is associated, you know, with the sun, and that the sun is a symbol of it, or in some ways this power might be like a symbol of the sun. And again, talking about the sun on different levels, both the physical sun that gives the energy to the earth, as well as that what, you know, Ficino's calling like the higher or intellectual sun, you know, at a higher non-material level. And yes, this statue is quite striking. Now, this is from, well, this particular statue actually has a very interesting history. It was contained sort of secretly in the Vatican. It's now lost, but it was held secretly in the Vatican, and then rediscovered in the, I think, or sort of finally like came to at least some sort of light like a few hundred years ago. And eventually the statue was lost. Yeah, right, lost. Although there are other known examples now as well. So this is essentially a statue of Priapus, who is always depicted with a, you know, very is iffy phallic, you know, having a large erect penis, and he's a god of, you know, fertility, right? And it is a symbol of fertility, and he was often associated with the rooster. And since you can see here, he's got this kind of head of the rooster, and then obviously the rooster's head is also the male genitals. And at the bottom there in Greek, you see savior of the cosmos, or savior of the world, written there. Yeah, and so this image is also linked to the sun, because the rooster is very traditionally attributed to the sun, right? I mean, the rooster, you know, sort of crows at dawn, and is associated with the sun, you know, and is taken to kind of worship the sun symbolically. You know, different like plants, like heliotropes that follow the sun throughout the day, or different animals that seem to recognize dawn, are associated with the sun. So here you have, you know, associations, you know, with fertility, with the male genitals, and with the sun. But again, you know, for our purposes here, the sexual generative power is not, you know, related to, or is not gendered, and exists in all sexually mature humans. You know, and as I talked about before, of course, some of that privileging, you know, of the male genitals there comes from the lack of understanding of how human reproduction works, and the non-understanding of the fact that, you know, that women contribute just as much to the formation, or you know, the genetic material that forms the child as the father does. You know, it was often thought that the womb was just like a passive receptacle for the semen, though we, you know, now know that that's not the case. All right, so just moving on here, because we've still got a few more things to go, a handful of things to go through. All right, so let's sort of come back to Thelema, with all that kind of as a preamble there, and come back to the Thelema and talk about some of the specific references to solar things, like in the Holy Books and in other Thelemic documents. So on the left there, again, you see, you know, Rahu Quit, who is a kind of composite form of Horus and Ra, and is definitely solar. You can see the sun disk on his head there, and the Uraeus serpent as well. Serpents are often associated with the sun and with that power, and sometimes also with the genitals as well, and with the sexual power. All right, so in the Book of the Law, we read, and I'm not going to interpret these passages or anything like that. I'm just going to sort of read them, and then you can make them what you will. So we read, the sun, strength, and sight, light. These are for the servants of the star and the snake. Well, so in Thelema, this idea of the star and the snake, right? The star is associated with Nuit, and the snake is associated with Hadit. Yeah. All right, and then in chapter 3, we read, the other images group around me to support me. Let all be worshipped, for they shall cluster to exalt me. And this is Rahu Quit speaking here. I am the visible object of worship. The others are secret. For the beast and his bride are they, and for the winners of the ordeal X. What is this? Thou shalt know. And so at times, anyways, this idea of the visible object of worship, this is very directly associated with the sun in Crowley's work, and the idea that you know, the sun and this solar principle is the prime or first like object of worship for Thelemites, and that the principles of Nuit and Hadit are higher and are beyond that. And so this idea of the ordeal X, Crowley, at least at times, interpreted this as like knowledge and conversation. So the idea that before knowledge and conversation, before becoming an adept, the sun, and you know, and that of course is Tefereth on the Tree of Life, is the primary or the holy guardian angel is what we are primarily directing our aspiration and energy to. And then after that stage, deeper things represented by Nuit and Hadit become visible to us. All right, and then from an essay of Crowley's on the law of liberty, where he really expounds on the philosophy and basic message of the Book of the Law and of Thelema. Crowley writes, Lift yourselves up, my brothers and sisters of the earth. Put beneath your feet all fears, all qualms, all hesitancies. Lift yourselves up, come forth, free and joyous by night and day, to do your will. For there is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Lift yourselves up, walk forth with us as in light and life and love and liberty, taking our pleasure as kings and queens in heaven and on earth. The sun is arisen, the specter of the ages has been put to flight. The word of sin is restriction, or as it has been otherwise said on this text, that is sin, to hold thy Holy Spirit in. Go on in thy might, and let no man make thee afraid. So we can see here that Crowley is associating the sun with the idea of the new aeon. The sun is being associated with will in the doing of the will. And hopefully that makes just a kind of intuitive sense of why the idea of the will and doing the true will would be solar. It's you like radiating your own nature and your own most deep the purpose in nature into the world, but also without lust of result. Just as the sun shines equally on everything. Everything that's facing it, everything that's able to receive the sun. The sun doesn't pick and choose where it shines its light. So that's a bit like not having lust of result, right? Just the brightness of life, of vitality, of freedom. All these things are being associated with the sun here. All right, and then I was thinking before actually preparing this class, I was like, there's so many solar references all throughout the Holy Books, but actually, if you sort of go through them, it can be hard to find like long, sustained passages where the sun is discussed in a very like kind of direct or concentrated way, but it's scattered throughout all the different holy books and other like Thelemic texts. There are many solar images and solar references, and there's solar significance that you kind of have to be on the lookout for. So one way that we can do this, or one access point, for solar imagery is through the image of gold, right? We talked a little bit about the alchemical significance of that, and how gold, all the way back to that Valens quote, and all throughout the magical tradition, gold is always associated with the sun and is the metal of the sun. So references to an imagery, including gold, can, be interpreted as solar references, possibly as other things as well, and possibly more astrologically, more alchemically, however, but definitely when we're seeing images of gold, we can think of solar significance there. So just I've got two quotes here from Liber 7 that both involve a good amount of gold imagery. All right, so from chapter 4, we have, I am like a maiden bathing in a clear pool of fresh water. O my God, I see thee, dark and desirable, rising through the water as a golden smoke. Thou art altogether golden, the hair and the eyebrows and the brilliant face, even into the fingertips and toe tips. Thou art one rosy dream of gold. Deep into thine eyes that are golden, my soul leaps, like an archangel menacing the sun. And then from chapter 7, we also read, but of pure black marble is the sorry statue, and the changeless pain of the eyes is bitter to the blind. We understand the rapture of that shaken marble, torn by the throes of the crowned child, the golden rod of the golden God. And so this image here of the golden rod of the golden God, again, we can interpret this in many different ways, I'm sure. But if we think of gold as a solar reference, we're talking about a solar god here. And this idea of the golden rod, in the magical tradition, the rod, the weapon of the rod, is very similar to the wand. And both the rod and the wand can be taken as phallic symbols. So the golden rod of the golden god, we're linking up divinity, magical power, gold, the sun, and the sexual generative power as well. And yeah, Ben, I agree. Liber 7 is yeah, is an amazing, inspiring, and really, really beautiful text. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Liber 15. Now, Liber 15 is the text of the Gnostic Mass, and so the Gnostic Mass, as an official ritual of Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, is not something we discuss in Temple of the Silver Star. It's an entirely separate order that we're not affiliated with. But Liber 15, just the text of that ritual. Of course, there are also many people performing this ritual who are doing it outside of being members of OTO, or doing it outside of association with OTO as well. So I'm just discussing it here as a ritual written by Crowley, not as anything having to do with that order OTO, which I'm not a member of. So with that out of the way, I think if we read and look through Liber 15, we can find a lot of really important clues to the function and significance of the sun in Thelema. So at the beginning, the people recite a creed, stating a series of beliefs, in which Crowley hoped that these beliefs would be, I don't know that he actually succeeded, but hoped that these beliefs would all be things that, the man of science, would be able to accept, and didn't contain any superstition or anything like that. Again, you can judge how successful that was. But in the creed, the people say, "I believe in one secret and ineffable Lord, and in one star in the company of stars, of whose fire we are created and to which we shall return. And in one Father of life, mystery of mystery, in his name, Chaos, the sole vice-regent of the sun upon the earth." Right, so there's this idea of a secret and ineffable Lord. And we'll see that in just at the bottom of the page here. And in one star, in the company of stars, right? So this is our sun, which is here being identified as just one star in the company of stars. Now, as I was saying before, there's this connection between the heliocentric model and this broader cosmic or stellar perspective. That even though the sun is sort of the father and creator and all that, it is just one star in the company of stars. Of whose fire we are created, and to which we shall return. This is just literal physical, fact that the about the generation of our solar system and the ultimate fate of the sun, the ultimate fate of the Earth. When the sun expands and swallows up the inner planets in many millions of years from now. And also of course, talking about a deeper mystical truth or interpretation of that as well. And in one Father of life, mystery of mystery, in his name, Chaos. Now, the figure of Chaos is a complex topic of, all on its own. Primarily, this is from the Vision and the Voice, the figure of Chaos. And people have had slightly different opinions about this, but you could think that Chaos is really just sort of another name for the beast, or is potentially a higher form of the beast, but it is definitely very much connected to the beast. Right, but here Chaos is being identified, with the phallus, the sole vice-regent of the sun upon the earth. And a vice-regent, of course, is like a deputy, someone that's been, someone that can act like in the place of a ruler. So the sun, of course, is the regent, and then the phallus is like the vice-regent of the sun upon the earth. And again, with Merrill's interpretation that the phallus is the sexual generative power resident in all humans. All right, and then there's a section in the Mass called the Collects, where the deacon recites a series of 11 prayers to different principles. And so the first two are the Son and the Lord. So for the Son, the deacon says, "Lord visible and sensible, of whom this earth is but a frozen spark, turning about thee with annual and diurnal motion. Source of light, source of life, let thy perpetual radiance hearten us to continual labor and enjoyment, so that as we are constant partakers of thy bounty, we may in our particular orbit give out light and life, sustenance and joy to them that revolve about us, without diminution of substance or effulgence forever." So most of this is pretty clear. This idea of the earth as a frozen spark, turning about thee with annual and diurnal motion. Again, this is just referring to the physical, astronomical facts. In that annual and diurnal rhythm and cycle we've already talked about. Source of light, source of life. Again, these are just literally physically true. And that now that this prayer is that we sort of identify ourselves with the sun. So just as we turn, orbit about the sun and receive its light and life, its rays, so may we become, to those people that sort of revolve about us, in the course of our lives. All right, so that was the Lord visible and sensible, is the sun. And now we have the Lord secret and most holy. So we read, Lord secret and most holy, source of light, source of life, source of love, source of liberty. Be thou ever constant and mighty within us, force of energy, fire of motion. With diligence let us ever labor with thee, that we may remain in thine abundant joy. And so at least one way that we can interpret this Lord, and of course this is the secret and ineffable Lord referred to at the beginning of the creed there, is as the phallus. And so it's obviously being linked to the sun, where the sun is the visible and sensible Lord, and then the phallus, or the divine creative principle represented by the phallus as the Lord's secret and most holy. And we can see that where the sun is the source of light and life, the Lord is being described here as the source of light, life, love, and liberty. All right, and then two more things from Liber 15. Later on, the priest sort of invokes the power he needs to be able to perform the ritual, and also kind of sets up a lot of the intention for what's going to happen in the Mass. And he says, "Thou that art one, our Lord in the universe, the Son, our Lord in ourselves, whose name is Mystery of Mystery, uttermost being, whose radiance enlightening the worlds is also the breath that maketh every god, even in death, to tremble before thee. By the sign of light," and the priest would make like a cross gesture, "by the sign of light, appear thou glorious upon the throne of the sun. Make open the path of creation and of intelligence between us and our minds. Enlighten our understanding, encourage our hearts. Let thy light crystallize itself in our blood, fulfilling us of resurrection." So yeah, this should, I think, all be pretty clear at this point. That we're addressing both the Lord in the universe, the Son, as well as that inner Lord, that inner power, whose name is Mystery of Mystery. This idea of making every god, even death, to tremble. This again is that, which reminds me a little bit of Ficino talking about. There's like the physical, sensible sun, and then behind that you have that sort of divine, creative principle, and that this thing, death trembles before it, because again you have that idea of the constancy and the eternal nature of that principle, that our physical death doesn't compromise in any way. How exactly we understand that is very much an individual thing, and you can study that in Crowley and elsewhere. All right, and then there's an invocation a moment later in the Mass, where the priest invokes, this solar, phallic, creative power that he needs, with a series of kind of barbarous or semi-barbarous names here from Greek. And so the priest says, "Yo, yo, yo, iao, sabao, kurie abrasax, kurie mithras, kurie phale, io pan, pan, io iskaros, io athanatos, io abratos, io iao, kaire phale, kaire pamphage, kaire pangenitor, hagios, 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 iao." So just real briefly, Io at the beginning there is just a kind of cry of ecstasy. Iao is a divine name, often linked to the sun. I've talked about that in some previous classes, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that name, Iao. But it is often depicted as a solar name. Let's see, Kyrie Abrasax, Lord Abrasax, right, a Gnostic divinity, again solar, and the name Abrasax, when summed by isopsophy, Greek numerology, sums to 365, which is of course the number of days in the solar year. Kyrie Mithras, Lord Mithras, and again Mithras, at least when spelled this way, also sums to 365, and then Kyrie Phale, Lord Phallus. Then we have Pan, again, the Greek god Pan, often associated with fertility, with male sexuality. And then Pan is also kind of esoterically understood as meaning all, right? Even though that's not actually the etymology of the god named Pan. Io Iskaros, mighty, yeah. Iskaros means mighty. Athanatos, immortal or deathless. Let's see, Iao, Kyrie, hail, Kyrie Phale, hail Phallus, Kyrie Pamphage, all devourer, Kyrie Pangenitor, all begetter. So this is like the Phallus, the all devourer, the all begetter. And then Hagios, 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 holy, 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 Iao. All right, so yes, moving on a little bit, we got about 20 minutes left here, so I'm going to try to speed up just a little bit. So we can talk about some of the tarot cards associated here. This is, of course, the Atu-19, the sun. It's associated with the letter, or it's attributed to the letter Resh. Resh has a value of 200, and Resh also has the significance of the head, or means the head in our tradition. And as we saw earlier in that quote with Valens, Valens is talking about the sun in astrology ruling the head. So again, this association of the sun with the head, and we can think about that as the intelligence and the mind, those things being associated with the head and with the sun. And I also got a quotation there from the 30 paths of wisdom. And so here we have the path, attributed to the letter Resh. And we read, the 30th path is the collective intelligence, and astrologers deduce from it the judgment of the stars and celestial signs, and perfect their science according to the rules and motions of the stars. And then on the right there, we see the image from the tarot card, from the Thoth deck, the Crowley-Harris deck. It's pretty close to traditionally like the Marseille image of the sun. We see it, around the outside. You've got the 12 signs of the zodiac there. Then the sun in the center, emitting its rays. And in the center of the sun there, you see a rose. And Crowley talks about, this image here, he links this image to the image of the rose and cross, which has, some of you I'm sure are familiar with the symbolism of the rose and cross. It has a huge range of meanings and an incredible depth. It does have a sexual interpretation. The cross can be sort of attributed to the male genitals and the rose to the female genitals. And so the union of the rose and cross symbolically is like the union of the male and the female, and is one symbol of the great work, the union of the microcosm and macrocosm, the adept and the angel, and all those sorts of ideas. And then the two children there down at the bottom, they are sort of dancing and playing because they have been. The idea here is that they've been liberated, by the new aeon and this solar principle, and the freedom and joy and vitality. And you can see they have butterfly wings there, right? Talking about this idea of like transformation and awakening and emergence, that's all associated with the solar principle, especially in Thelema and the Thelemic dispensation. So yeah, an image of light and vitality and radiance, an image of like the center and the centrality, both of the microcosm as well as the macrocosm. Right, so let's just move on here. All right, and then now we come to Atu 11, which is associated with the sign Leo, right, which is the house of the sun, the zodiac sign ruled by the sun, and as we talked about at the beginning, also Crowley's rising sign. And so Crowley really makes a lot out of the Leo and the symbolism of Leo. Now, Leo, of course, is just the word lion in Latin, and the constellation of Leo, is a lion. So, and lions, besides just the astrological thing, lions are often very often associated with the sun, based on their appearance. The male lion, especially with his mane, golden mane, looks like the sun, radiating light. So the lion is one of the preeminent solar animals. So on the left there is an image from the Marseille, this card in the Marseille deck, and you see a woman holding open the jaws of a lion. And then based on the Thelemic revelation, and of course the book of Revelation, which it is, well, let me say a little bit about that, right? So at the beginning there, we saw that image of the beast, and we didn't look at the quote today, but there's also the whore of Babylon who rides upon the beast. Now, Crowley's interpretation of that is that, these early Christians and whoever it was, that actually composed that text, had a vision of the coming of the Aeon, of Horus, a vision of a future time when their tradition would be replaced by a newer dispensation. But they didn't understand this, and so they turned it into something evil and scary and threatening, when really it was the promise of just something new that would be born out of the old. So that's sort of how Crowley rereads these things, and as I'm sure a lot of you have heard me talk about before, there's a real, the things like the Beast 666 and the Whore of Babylon go from being symbols of evil and degradation to being very sacred and holy symbols. Though Babylon, retaining her sexual significance, it's just that female sexuality and pleasure has been elevated into a sacred spiritual symbol. And we can also see how that image of the Babylon riding upon the beast is a kind of transformation of that earlier symbol from the Marseille deck of the woman holding open the jaws of the lion. Yeah, lots more to say about that, but yeah, I'm just gonna move on here. All right, so just wanted to look really briefly at, I'm not going to go through all of Liber Resh, but just a kind of basic template for the four main, adorations that are done at the 4 stations of the day. I assume pretty much everybody here is familiar with Liber Resh and has probably practiced it. Our members, both in the academic and initiatory track, all receive training and detailed instructions in doing this. So if you are a member and have any questions about practical performance things, you can reach out, either to your instructor in the academic track or to the chiefs of your temple if you're an initiate. And again, there's lots of great resources out there, like David Shoemaker's Living Thelema has some great instructions in performing this. So I just wanted to mention some of the symbolic things coming out of this. So at all 4, you're adoring the sun at the 4 stations of the day: at dawn, at noon, at sunset, and at midnight. These are, of course, dawn and sunset are very obvious, important times. It's the appearance of the sun and the disappearance of the sun. Then noon is the sun is highest in the sky, and then midnight is the middle, of the period when the sun is invisible and we're in darkness, and is at the bottom. Is under the earth, as far away from us as it can be. And astrologically speaking, this is also the moments when the sun is conjoined, the 4 angles, the ascendant, the midheaven, descendant, and the IC, the Imam Coeli, right? So astrologically, this is also the time when the 4 times of the day when the sun's power, the sun is the most powerful and that solar energy is the most available. So we're worshiping or adoring the sun at these 4 times per day. And so there's a single template, and then you're just sort of plugging in different words and different symbols for the time of day. So at dawn, you're worshiping, and again, you're facing the direction of the sun. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're going to want to reverse the north and south because you want to face the direction where the sun is. But east and west don't change. Instead of south, you can just think towards the equator, and then instead of north, it's away from the equator, basically, right? So you're always facing towards the sun. And I think it's you can just face in that direction, but I think it's also very powerful to go somewhere that you can actually see the sun and look, maybe not stare directly into the sun, but look toward the sun and be very mindful of the physical presence of the sun's light as you do this. And it's not necessary, but I think that's an important thing. And of course, if you miss the exact time, it's perfectly fine to make it up later or something like that. But doing it right at that moment and in view of the sun, obviously you can't view the sun at midnight, but that itself becomes a very interesting thing. If you see the sun 3 times a day, that 4th adoration when the sun is invisible becomes even more, I think, striking. So at dawn, we're facing the rising sun in the east, assuming the god form of Ra, right, who's one of the Egyptian, in fact, the Egyptian god, most directly associated with the sun, even though there are many others. So we say, hail unto thee who art Ra in thy rising, even unto thee who art Ra in thy strength, who travelest over the heavens in thy bark at the uprising of the sun. right? So Ra is associated with the rising and uprising, which is obviously literally what's happening, and associated with the attribute of strength. Then at noon, we're facing the sun at the south, the sun high in the sky, and now assuming the form of the goddess Hathor or Hathor, who also has a solar significance. And so now we're saying, hail unto thee, who art a Hathor in thy triumphing, even unto thee, who art a Hathor in thy beauty, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the mid-course of the sun. So again, the mid-course of the sun, when the sun is highest in the sky, this is the triumphing of the sun and is being associated with beauty. Then at sunset, we're facing west, and we're adoring Tum in his setting, even unto thee who art Tum in thy joy, hail, who travels over the heavens in thy bark at the downgoing of the sun. So now the setting or downgoing is being associated with Tum or Atum, who we saw earlier bearing the solar bark in that image, and is being associated with joy. And then at midnight, we're facing the north, and now adoring the sun as Kefra, right, the beetle who rolls that dung ball through the underworld to dawn. And so we say, hail unto thee who art Kefra in thy hiding, even unto thee who art Kefra in thy silence, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the midnight hour of the sun. Now, it then goes on and says, Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahur abideth at the helm. These are just other gods that are present on the bark as well. And as I said, there's lots of different traditions about what other gods are present in the bark as well. Though the image that Crowley is here, the image that Crowley is using here is of Tahuti and Rahur in the boat as well. And you say, hail unto thee from the abodes of, and that's like the previous. So at dawn, you're saying, hail unto thee from the abodes of night, because we're just coming out of night and greeting the dawn as it comes into existence. All right, and then let's see. I might go a couple minutes over 7:30 here. If you've got to take off, of course, feel free. But I'll just finish up. I just got 2 slides left here. Oh, it looks like we've got a comment here. I didn't see when that came in, so sorry if this isn't relevant to what's on the screen anymore. Let's see, Stephen says, I've just recently started doing Resh, and there's definitely a deeper quality, to it when performed outside. Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to notice. Again, it doesn't have to be performed outside, it doesn't have to be performed at that exact moment, but doing it, yeah, like I said, when the sun is visible and right or close to the actual moment of transit, I think can be very powerful. And it's worth paying attention to how you feel, when you do it that way versus doing it some other way. Again, it's not about right and wrong, but I think just something to pay attention to. And getting up early, to do this right at dawn can be an important discipline as well. People sometimes talk about, Resh as being like a mindfulness practice that, that it reminds us, of the great work and things like that. And, and that's certainly true, but there's also a real deeper, like magical experience that can come through it as well, and of really connecting to that solar principle. You may need to practice it for some time, before that, becomes obvious to you. Yeah, Ben says I feel weird performing it to the corner of my room. Yeah, true. But if that's what you can do in that moment, of course it's fine. But yeah. All right, so yeah, let's go through this. This is fairly quickly if we can here. So this is the Mask of the Phoenix. This is Liber 44, and it's also chapter 44. Or originally, it's published as chapter 44 in the Book of Lies. Now, the number 44 is a very interesting number. The main reference is to the Hebrew word dam, which is daleth mem. It sums to 44 and means blood. It's also a very interesting word. If you add an aleph to the beginning, and aleph, has the significance of like the life breath, the divine breath that infuses life. You then get aleph daleth mem, which is Adam, who of course is the guy in the Garden of Eden. But esoterically, Adam is understood as like the name of humanity. So humanity is like blood infused with the divine breath. 44 also has a special reference to Horus and to Ra-Hoor-Khuit, and that's something that's revealed to Crowley in the time leading up to his reception of the Book of the Law. So other things as well, but 44 is an important key number here for this practice. All right, so let's just read through it and make a couple comments as I go. All right, so the magician, his breast bare, stands before. Of course, Crow's going to use masculine language here, but it's has nothing to do with being man here. The magician, his breast bare, stands before an altar on which are his burin. Now, a burin is an engraving tool. It actually works pretty well for this purpose, though you could also use a knife or something like that. You're going to scratch and draw a little bit of blood from your chest. And you only need a couple little drops of blood. You don't need to make a deep cut. So it's really more like scratching. And so a burin actually works well for that. With a knife or a blade or something like that, you have the risk of cutting too deeply. Some of you may have heard there's a Lon Mythology Cat has a very funny story about trying to do this practice using a scalpel and having to abandon the ritual in the middle when blood starts pouring out of his chest, which is a good Lon story. All right, so his burin or some other thing that you could use to scratch yourself with, a bell, thurible, which is like a censer, just a container to put a lit charcoal in, and 2 cakes of light. I assume most of you probably know what cakes of light are. They're special, small, sort of ritual cakes. The basic recipe for them is given in the Book of the Law, and you can look into that if you're interested. In 2 cakes of light. In the sign of the Enterer, he reaches west across the altar and cries, "Hail Ra, that goest in thy bark, into the caverns of the dark." He gives the sign of silence and takes the bell and the fire in his hands and says, "East of the altar see me stand, with light and music in mine hand." He then strikes upon the bell 11 times. He strikes 11 times upon the bell, 3, like in a battery of 3 strikes, 5 strikes, and then 3 strikes. So this is 11 total. And the way it's arranged here, the symbolism here is of like the 5 inside of the 6, which is the union of the microcosm and macrocosm, and a symbol of the great work. And then places the fire like a lit charcoal, into the thurible, into the censer, and says, "I strike the bell, I light the flame, I utter the mysterious name, Abrahadabra." And you'd want to vibrate that name, not just say it in practice. Abrahadabra, which is a word of 11 letters, is also a symbol of the great work and the union of the microcosm and macrocosm. Then strike the bell again 11 times in that same battery. And say, "Now I begin to pray, thou child, holy thy name and undefiled. Thy reign is come, thy will is done. Here is the bread, here is the blood. Bring me through midnight to the sun. Save me from evil and from good, that thy one crown, all the 10, even now and here be mine. Amen." So this image of the divine child, of course, this is related to the crowned and conquering child, who is a sort of another form of Rahur Kuit. And we can see a lot of the same solar themes we've been talking about here. At the beginning there, of course, we saw Hail Ra, that goest in thy bark, into the caverns of the dark. So this is using that Egyptian symbolism here. And we're talking here about bring me through midnight to the sun, let me pass the darkness, to the dawn. And of course, thy one crown of all the 10, that's a reference to Kether, out of the 10 Sephiroth. All right, and then 1 cake is put onto the coal so that it burns. Which can get quite smoky, so you may want to have adequate ventilation. And he says, "I burn the incense cake proclaim these adorations of thy name." And then it says he makes them as in Liber Legis. The idea here, and what most people understand, is that this is like the same adoration that's used in Liber Resh, after the specific adoration, that starts with unity uttermost showed, I adore the might of thy breath, that section is then recited here as part of the Mass of the Phoenix. Again, strikes upon the bell 11 times in that battery. And then with the burin, makes upon his breast the proper sign. So there's a little bit of different understandings about what the proper sign is supposed to be. What's likely, and I think reasonable, is that it's a form of the cross and the circle. Sometimes people will do this as like an upright, equal armed cross inside of a circle, and sometimes as like an X inside of a circle. Though honestly, that's basically the same image, just rotated 45 degrees. And it's another form of the rose and cross, the union of the microcosm and macrocosm, male and female, and so on, as well as lots of other symbols as well. So that sign is scratched into the chest, just enough so there's like a little drop or 2 of blood. And says, "Behold this bleeding breast of mine, gashed with the sacramental sign." And then now you kind of staunch the blood with the second cake so that the cake soaks up the blood, and say, I staunch the blood, the wafer soaks it up, and the high priest invokes. You then consume that cake. This bread I eat, this oath I swear, as I inflame myself with prayer. There is no grace, there is no guilt. This is the law, do what thou wilt. And he strikes again 11 times upon the bell, and you'll notice we've now struck 4 batteries of 11, meaning that there are 44 total bell strikes here. And we were saying 44 is the important number here, the key number to this, and cries abrahadabra, which again is a name of 11 letters. I entered in with woe, with mirth I now go forth, and with thanksgiving, to do my pleasure on the earth among the legions of the living. And then he goeth forth, right? So a lot of this symbolism here is this is being done, at sunset, as the sun, drops below the earth. And the way I've always kind of thought of this is that you're almost like becoming Kefra, and so this cake is being like charged with solar energy and with your own life force, through that blood. There's some very interesting symbolism connecting like blood to the sun, and sometimes there's even talk about like the blood of the sun. You'll see this in, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you'll definitely see this in some Thelemic texts. This idea of the blood of the sun, often symbolized or equated with wine, which may in some ways be related to the process of the fermentation of grapes. And of course, we can also make that link to Dionysus and the sun at night again. So there's a very deep sort of complex of symbols here that I think are really worth meditating on. And if you've never tried out this practice and you'd like to, that would be a great practice to try out as well. I think it really brings home a lot of these ideas. And is a powerful Eucharistic, a simple daily like Eucharistic ritual as well. All right. So last slide here. So I just wanted to kind of come back around to this what I've mentioned a few times already about the idea of the relationship between the stellar and the solar, where the sun is seen as just the local star, and stars are all understood as their own just distant suns, right? And so where Ra-Hoor-Khuit, is a solar god, and Hadit is solar as well, and actually another form of Horus. So there's this real emphasis on the solar, right, in the Book of the Law and then Thelema. And then Nuit herself is her body is the stars or is the night sky, and that's really taken to the point of her body being absolutely everything that exists, of being all, and at the same time also being nothing, or the kind of the infinite like cosmic zero. But within her body, is all of the stars. And so every one of these suns, these centers of power and vitality and life and light, these are all contained within her body. And another way, interesting sort of thing that you'll see, and we talked a little bit about some kind of gender and sex issues throughout this, but you sometimes see in Crowley the idea that like the sun is masculine, but Nuit as like the totality of suns is feminine. And that's something you'll see a lot in Crowley, the idea that like the point of individuality or the individual is kind of symbolically masculine, but the totality of all individuals is feminine. Again, that's not like a dogmatic or doctrinal thing, but that is something you'll see in Crowley, and another, I think, interesting way to think about some of these kind of tricky issues involving like gender and sexuality here. Again, no definite answers or anything like that, just stuff to contemplate. All right, and then a few sort of quotes from the final quotes from the Book of the Law here. So in chapter 1, this is Nuit speaking here. And says, since I am infinite space and the infinite stars thereof, do ye also thus, bind nothing. Let there be no difference made among you between any one thing and any other thing, for thereby there cometh hurt. And then in chapter 2, this is Hadit, the winged solar disk, speaking. I am the flame that burns in every heart of man and in the core of every star. I am life and the giver of life. Yet therefore is the knowledge of me the knowledge of death. Again, I think that relates to a number of themes that we've seen throughout this evening. And then finally, from chapter 1, every man and every woman is a star. And so again, the idea that, this is something Crowley really develops a lot, the idea that, each one of us is a star. We each have our own sort of proper course through the universe, and that each one of us is a shining center of life and light and vitality. And again, thinking about the stars is stars are also suns, and so each one of us is also a sun in a sense. And while you yourself are a sun, other people are like stars or something like that. You know what I mean? That we're each like that one singular like center of consciousness and light in the center of our own universe, the center of our own sort of planetary solar system, I guess, if you will. Our lives and the people and the environments and all that are around us. So yeah, we're just over an hour and a half here. I feel like we sort of barely scratched the surface, but hopefully that's some nice coordination of some different ideas for you to think about and work with here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes. But yeah, for more information about our work, you can visit tots.org/FAQ. If you want to contact me directly, about sort of anything in this class or to be added to our public Google group to get announcements, you can email me at matthew.shmansky@gmail.com. And we also have a $5 suggested donation for anyone who's not a member of either our academic or our initiatory track. And if you'd like to do that, you can send it via PayPal to payments@tots.org. So yeah, thanks everybody. And as I was saying, this is in a way a little bit of like a kind of a prologue to a longer series that will be starting in January about the planetary magic and hexagram rituals. We'll have more a chance to talk about the sun, but I also wanted to focus on the kind of particular importance of the sun in Thelema. So let's see, got a couple comments coming in here. Let's see. Ben says, will this recording be on the TOTS forum? I'm going to put it on YouTube, so this will be publicly available. I'll put a link on the forum, but it'll go up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, so everyone can have access to it. And then Kristen says, so we are all the point in the circle that is everywhere and nowhere. Yeah, and that that idea of like an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. That's an idea that gets referenced in the Book of the Law and has a long. I never actually found out where that first comes from. I've seen it attributed to different authors and quoted in different places. But yeah, that idea of an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere is certainly an idea connected to a lot of these things that we've been talking about. Let's see, I see a couple more people typing there now. Let's see, so Stephen said circumference equals Nuit and center is Hadi. Yeah, yep, exactly. And then you could think of, there's different ways of thinking about it, but like Ra-Horaquid is in a sense like everything in between. Or like the connection between the center or the circumference, or that which is like produced by the union of that center and that circumference. And of course, if we think about the glyph of the sun, right? Let me jump back to that, right? The glyph of the sun is literally a circle, a circumference with a point in the center. So we can see that idea of center and circumference right in the glyph of the sun itself, which is pretty cool. Let's see, Jesse says, for practices like Liber Resh, if you are not able to step away privately, is it still worthwhile to mentally visualize and perform the ritual? Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have much more to say about that, I guess, other than just yes. Doing it is always better than not doing it, no matter how non-ideal the conditions. I think in the beginning, you definitely want to get some good solid practice of actually making the gestures and actually saying out loud. And then once you get sort of used to what it feels like to do it sort of physically and out loud, then it becomes easier to do it internally. So I wouldn't recommend doing it like always internally. You should do it out loud and with the gestures whenever possible, and definitely at the beginning. but yeah, it's always better to do it than to not do it. And I don't think there's any reason to put yourself into a situation that might be awkward or uncomfortable, like at work or something like that. Just to make some point of doing it, privately and silently is perfectly fine. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in here, so I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah, for everyone on YouTube, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and if you can like the video, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get new videos as they come in. Though we do, attending live is really great. So we do encourage people to attend live, if you can, but the recordings will be made publicly available afterwards. So yeah, thanks again for attending and listening, and we'll see you next time. 93.